7 losing trades in a row will happen to almost every trader who lasts long enough to call themselves a trader. That's not a warning. That's a statistical certainty. The question that actually separates the accounts that survive from the accounts that don't isn't whether you'll hit a losing streak. It's what happens inside your head during trade 4, 5, and 6. Because by the time you're arguing with yourself about trade 7, the damage is usually already done. Here's the claim that's going to bother some of you. A losing streak isn't a market event. It's an emotional cycle with a predictable shape, almost identical from trader to trader, and it runs on a timer whether you're aware of it or not. The 5% who survive it aren't the ones who avoid the cycle. Nobody avoids it. They're the ones who can name which stage they're in while they're still in it. Today, I'm going to walk you through that cycle stage by stage, show you exactly where most traders get stuck, and show you the specific thing that breaks it. Because it isn't willpower, and it isn't a pep talk. You've probably tried to push through a losing streak before. Grit your teeth, tell yourself the next one's due, double down on conviction. If that's worked for you, you wouldn't be watching a video with this title. It's not that you lack discipline, it's not that you need a better strategy, it's not that the market suddenly turned against you personally, though it will absolutely feel that way by trade 5. The real problem is that a losing streak triggers an emotional sequence your brain runs on autopilot, and almost nobody's ever been taught to recognize it happening in real time. It's not weakness, it's not talent. The difference is this: some traders feel the cycle and call it reality. Others feel the exact same cycle and call it a cycle, and that one distinction is worth more than any indicator you'll ever add to a chart. Let me show you what this actually looks like, because it's more specific than he got emotional and she didn't. Chris is on his 4th losing trade of the week by Wednesday morning. He's a former options desk analyst. Sharp, technically excellent, the kind of trader who can explain implied volatility skew to a room of strangers and make it sound simple. Trade 1 was a clean setup that just didn't work. Normal, expected, the cost of doing business. Trade 2 was slightly worse, a setup he half-talked himself into. By trade 3, something shifts in Chris that he doesn't notice shifting. He starts checking his P&L between trades, instead of after the session. He starts refreshing news feeds looking for anything. That explains why this is happening, some external villain to blame it on. Because the alternative explanation, that this is just variance, feels unbearable to a man who prides himself on being the smartest person in most rooms. By trade 4, he's not really trading his plan anymore. He's trading his need to be right again, immediately, to prove the last 4 trades were an anomaly and not a preview. Trade 5 is a size increase he doesn't fully register as a size increase. Trade 6, he's staring at the screen with a tightness in his chest he'd never admit to anyone. And by trade 7, he's not trading a setup at all. He's trading an emotion, and the account knows it before he does. Elena hits the exact same run. 4 losses, same week, same instrument. Comparable setups. She used to run a small bakery before she started trading full-time, and she'll tell you, if you ask, that the losing streak doesn't feel any different to her than it does to Chris. Same tightness, same urge to prove something, same voice in her head insisting the next one is guaranteed. The difference isn't that she doesn't feel it. The difference is that somewhere around trade 2, she says a sentence to herself, out loud sometimes, that Chris never learned to say, "I recognize this feeling, and I know what it does to my decisions if I let it drive." That single sentence doesn't make the feeling go away. It just moves her from being inside the feeling to being next to it, watching it, which turns out to be the entire difference between a 4-loss week that costs $300 and a 7-loss week that costs $3,000 and a broken account. Here's the detail most versions of this story skip. Chris didn't get this way because he's reckless. He got this way because his entire professional identity, going back to business school, was built on the idea that being right consistently and visibly is what makes someone valuable. On the desk, being wrong quietly for a week was almost unthinkable. You found the reason, you fixed it, you moved on with your reputation intact. That instinct, find the reason fast, served him for a decade in a job with a team around him to catch mistakes. Trading alone, at home, with nobody to catch anything. That same instinct turns into stage 3 by Wednesday because the fastest available reason is always an external one, and nobody's there to tell him otherwise. Elena's discipline came from somewhere that has nothing to do with markets at all. Running a bakery for 6 years taught her something specific about bad stretches. A slow week doesn't mean the bread is suddenly worse. And a good baker doesn't start throwing extra flour into every batch out of panic just because Tuesday and Wednesday were quiet. She learned the hard way, in a business with thin margins and daily feedback, that reacting emotionally to a short, bad stretch usually turns it into a long one. She didn't import a trading strategy into her trading. She imported a relationship to bad stretches, and it turned out to matter more than almost anything she's since learned about charts. Same losing streak, same emotional chemistry, practically identical. Wildly different outcomes, not because Elena is calmer by nature. She'd tell you flatly that she isn't. The difference is that Chris experienced the cycle as truth, and Elena experienced it as a cycle, a shape she'd seen before, and could recognize the second time it started forming. So let's name that shape, because most traders have felt every stage of it and never had language for a single one. Stage 1 is disbelief. This is the first loss, or maybe the second. And it doesn't feel like much yet. It feels like normal variance, which it usually is. The danger here isn't the loss itself. It's the quiet decision traders make, almost unconsciously, to stop paying close attention because it's just one. It's fine. That relaxed attention is exactly what lets stage 2 build without resistance. Stage 2 is justification. The losses start forming a pattern, and instead of registering the pattern, the brain starts building explanations for why each individual loss doesn't count. This one was bad luck. This one was a fluke in the data. This one doesn't reflect my actual edge. Each justification is individually plausible. Collectively, they're a wall being built between the trader and the information that the trader most needs to see. That something in their execution or their market read has stopped working for now and needs attention, not excuses. Stage 3 is the hunt for a villain. This is where it stops being quiet. The trader starts looking outward for someone or something to blame. Manipulation, a broker's execution, smart money hunting stops, and algorithms specifically targeting their account. This stage feels like clarity. It's the opposite. It's the nervous system converting an uncomfortable internal fact, I am currently making worse decisions than usual, into a comfortable external story, something out there is against me. The villain hunt feels powerful. It's actually a surrender of agency dressed up as defiance. Stage 4 is escalation, and this is the stage that turns a bad week into a blown account. The trader, unconsciously convinced they're due, starts increasing size, tightening stops out of impatience, entering earlier than their plan allows, or taking setups that wouldn't have made the list on a normal day. This isn't a strategy decision. It's the nervous system trying to resolve the discomfort of the losing streak as fast as possible. And the fastest resolution it can imagine is a big win, right now, to make the feeling stop. Almost every account-ending trade you've ever heard about started in stage 4. Stage 5 is numbness, and it usually only arrives after escalation has already done its damage. The trader stops feeling the sting of individual losses because there have been too many of them too close together, and a kind of flat, disconnected autopilot sets in. This looks like calm from the outside. It isn't. It's a nervous system that's run out of the resources to keep reacting. And traders in this stage often keep trading listlessly, not because they have a plan, but because stopping would require a level of self-awareness the numbness has temporarily switched off. Stage 6 for the traders who make it here is the real one. Recovery, but not the kind that happens by winning the next trade back. Real recovery starts the moment a trader can look at the previous 5 stages and name them, out loud or on paper, as something that happened to them, rather than something that proves who they are. This stage doesn't feel dramatic. It feels almost anticlimactic, which is exactly why so many traders skip past it looking for a bigger emotional resolution that never comes. There's a reason this cycle feels so personal every single time, even to traders who've been through it a dozen times before. Each stage is designed, biologically, to feel like the first time. Disbelief feels fresh because the brain treats each new losing streak as a new threat, not a repeat of an old survivable one. Justification feels reasonable because in the moment, each individual excuse genuinely sounds plausible. That's what makes it justification instead of an obvious lie. The villain hunt feels like insight, not paranoia, because blaming something external activates the same neural reward as solving a real problem, even though nothing has actually been solved. This is why traders with years of experience still fall into all 6 stages just as hard as beginners do. Experience doesn't inoculate you against the cycle. It only gives you the vocabulary to notice it faster if you've bothered to learn the vocabulary at all, which almost nobody has because almost nobody's ever laid the stages out and given them names. Here's what the 5% do differently at each of these stages, and none of it is what you'd expect from a motivational trading video. Shift 1 happens at stage 1, disbelief, and it's simply this: treat the first loss as data, not as an event to feel something about. The 5% have a rule written down that no single loss gets analyzed for meaning until a session or a day is fully closed. This sounds almost too simple to matter. It matters enormously because it removes the option to start building a narrative, good or bad, around a sample size of 1, which is exactly when narratives are most dangerous, because they're least supported by evidence. Shift 2 happens at stage 2, justification, and it's a specific written check rather than a mental one. After the second loss in a row, the trader writes down, in one sentence, whether the losses match their historical loss pattern or whether something about execution has actually changed. Not a feeling, a comparison against their own trading journal. Elena's version of this is a single line in a notebook. Same mistake as usual, or new mistake. That distinction, written rather than felt, cuts straight through the justification stage, because justification only survives in the vague, unexamined space of, it's probably fine. It doesn't survive being forced into a specific written sentence. Shift 3 happens at stage 3, the villain hunt, and the shift is almost embarrassingly simple. The moment a trader notices they're blaming something external, the algorithm, the broker, manipulation, the news, that noticing itself is the signal to stop trading for the session, not as punishment, as information. The urge to find a villain is reliably the clearest tell that a trader has entered the part of the cycle where their judgment can no longer be trusted for new decisions that day. The 5% have learned to treat that specific thought, something is rigged against me, not as an insight, but as an alarm bell. Shift 4 happens at stage 4, escalation, and it's the most mechanical of all the shifts, because escalation is too dangerous to leave to willpower in the moment. The 5% set a hard, pre-committed rule before any losing streak begins. After 2 or 3 losses in a session, position size is cut, never increased, automatically, no exceptions. No override based on how confident the next setup feels. This rule exists specifically because it removes the decision from the moment it's most likely to be made badly. Chris didn't lack this rule because he lacked intelligence. He lacked it because he'd never separated how confident I feel right now from how trustworthy my judgment actually is right now. And those two things detach from each other precisely during a losing streak. The setups that feel most compelling on trade 6 are, statistically, no better than the setups on trade 1. They just come wrapped in more desperation. And desperation is an excellent salesman. Shift 5 happens at stage 5, numbness, and the shift here is almost physical rather than mental. A hard stop, tied to a number of losses or a time of day, decided in advance. That ends the session regardless of how the trader feels in the moment. Numbness is dangerous specifically because it disables the internal alarm that would normally say, I should stop. The 5% don't rely on noticing they're numb. They rely on a rule that doesn't require noticing anything at all. Shift 6 happens at stage 6, and it's the only shift that isn't really about the market at all. It's a short, unglamorous review, done the next morning rather than the same night, that asks one question: which stage did I get stuck in, and what specifically pulled me out, or what would have pulled me out if I'd caught it sooner? This review isn't about the trades, it's about naming the emotional stage accurately. Because a trader who can say, I was in stage 3 by 10 a.m., has just done something Chris never learned to do: turned a feeling into a fact, and a fact into information he can use next time the cycle starts again. Because it will. Here's where this stops being about a checklist and starts being about who you are as a trader. Most struggling traders believe a losing streak is a referendum on their skill, their edge, or their worth as a trader. And that belief is exactly what keeps them trapped inside the cycle instead of standing next to it. Notice what that belief actually does. It turns a temporary run of variance into a verdict on identity. And once something becomes a verdict on identity, the brain will fight to escape that verdict immediately, which is exactly the pressure that produces stage 4's escalation. The losses aren't what causes the account damage. The meaning attached to the losses is what causes it. The 5% have made a quiet but total shift in identity. They no longer see themselves as a trader who either does or doesn't have losing streaks. Every trader has them. They see themselves as a trader who has learned to recognize 6 specific stages while they're happening, which is a completely different skill than avoiding the stages altogether, and it's the only version of that skill that's actually achievable by a human being. This is a smaller claim than most trading content is willing to make, and that's exactly why it works. Nobody's offering you immunity from feeling awful during a bad week. What's on offer is something much less glamorous and far more useful: the ability to feel awful and still make the same size trade you'd have made on a good week, because you've correctly identified the awfulness as stage 2 or 3 instead of as a fact about your future. When you stop being the trader who needs the losing streak to not happen and become the trader who can name exactly where they are inside it, the size of your losses stops being determined by the market and starts being determined by how early you caught yourself. That's a genuinely different game than the one Chris was playing for most of his first year. And it's a completely learnable one, which is the only reason this video is worth making. And here's the part that's going to deflate some of you on purpose. Breaking a losing streak is not a comeback story. There's no dramatic redemption trade, no moment where conviction returns and the account roars back to life in one green candle. The traders who actually handle losing streaks well have sessions that, from the outside, look almost nothing like a turnaround. They look like smaller size, fewer trades. A written sentence in a notebook instead of a bold new strategy. If you're expecting the moment you break a losing streak to feel triumphant, you're going to miss it every time, because it doesn't feel like anything. It feels like quietly doing less on purpose while everyone else is doing more out of panic. If breaking a losing streak feels exciting or dramatic to you, you're probably still inside it. Go back to Chris and Elena for a second. 3 months later, Chris eventually recovered from that week, but it took 2 more losing streaks, each one slightly worse than the last, before he finally wrote his first sentence about which stage he'd gotten stuck in. He's better now. Genuinely better, but it cost him roughly a year of unnecessary drawdowns to learn what Elena already knew going in: that the feeling is not the enemy, the failure to name it is. He still catches himself some mornings, reaching for an explanation involving manipulation or bad luck, and he's learned to treat that reach itself as the tell, the same way you'd notice your hand moving toward a hot stove and pull back before touching it. Elena's account didn't skip losing streaks either. She had one just last month: 5 losses in 6 trades, and by her own account, it felt just as uncomfortable as it always does. The same tightness, the same urge to prove something immediately. The difference is she caught herself in stage 2 instead of stage 5, cut size instead of adding to it, and closed the week down a small, forgettable amount instead of down enough to change how she slept. Nobody made a highlight reel of that week. There was no comeback, no green candle that fixed everything in one trade. There was just a smaller loss than it could have been, and a notebook entry that said, essentially, same pattern as always, caught it early this time. Every trader watching this will hit a losing streak again, probably sooner than you'd like. The question isn't whether the 6 stages will show up. They will, every time, almost identical in shape. The only real choice you get is whether you experience that shape as an unfolding truth about who you are, the way Chris did for a year, or whether you can catch yourself somewhere around stage 2, write one honest sentence, and let a bad week stay a bad week instead of becoming the story of your account.